From the opening tip-off to the final buzzer of the big dance, this is where the madness lives. The roar of the student section, we hear it. The bracket-busting upsets, we predict them. The legends in the making, we've got the stats on lock. Whether you're a die-hard alum or a casual fan of the chaos, you're officially on the clock. This is the pulse of the court. This is the home of the hoop. And this is Hardwood Gameday. And now, the man who lives and breathes the game, here's your host, Trevor Williams.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back. March Madness is underway, and the dance is just starting to get good, ladies and gentlemen. It's one of those moments when you realize, is my bracket safe? No, a lot of those brackets have already been derailed in the very first night of March Madness, where Ohio State blunders to TCU in a heartbreaking fashion at the tail end, but TCU was running the show, ladies and gentlemen. They found ways to take care of business when no one else thought it was possible, and they end up putting Ohio State away, creating the first upset. But we all know 8 and 9 matchups are the toughest selections to pick in anyone's bracket because those are really just a coin flip, and it's just who's hot at that moment in time to get the job done. But then if you thought that was bad, later in the afternoon, I guess still early in the afternoon, we see the High Point upset with Wisconsin, ladies and gentlemen. The first Cinderella, I would say, type of moment in this tournament thus far. Yes, we still got games in the 64 today, so there's more possible upsets. I mean, Texas taking down BYU, is that surprising? Maybe Texas was not seeded correctly. I am not the committee on that front, ladies and gentlemen. So where Texas sat, I mean, they're more than an 11 seed, but at the same time, it is what it is, ladies and gentlemen. They had a play to get in, and they showed that they belong by taking out 2 tough opponents all along the way to the dance. So for them, if we're going to use the dance analogy, it's like they missed their Uber ride to the dance, and they had to do like a Lime scooter to get to the dance. So they had to pedal their way through a tough competition, through an overpass, and then they got to the dance, and then they had to face a number 6 team and BYU to really get themselves a little bit closer on the dance floor. So they got away from the wall, as we all know how some dances are back in middle school or high school. This is one of those moments where you're stepping a little bit forward and keeping that momentum high. But High Point right now, ladies and gentlemen, is looking to be America's Cinderella thus far. But we'll see as they advance to the round of 32 and get the job done. But ladies and gentlemen, let's recap that game, ladies and gentlemen. So we're going to take a quick recap of the High Point is feeling the highs after beating Wisconsin, ladies and gentlemen. So when we look at High Point right now, ladies and gentlemen, they're feeling mighty high, if you ask me. But they were trailing at halftime, 41-39, ladies and gentlemen. So when you have that momentum going in, it's one of those things where you have to keep a close eye. Does this win get to their head? I don't know. Their women is also in the March Madness tournament for the women's bracket. So having two sports teams being in it is definitely a lot of pressure on the school and the athletes to try to perform to the best of their abilities. But that's what the beautiful of the game is right now, ladies and gentlemen. Beautiful of the game. But then you go into the second half. That's when High Point kind of starts to say, hey, we can hang around and create momentum in this game, ladies and gentlemen. So they end up getting 44 points in the second half, and Wisconsin just was consistent with getting 41, but that wasn't enough. Where did it go wrong? Let's take a deeper look at where did things go wrong for Wisconsin. And you may ask, Trevor, what happened in this scenario? Wisconsin shot good from the field. They were 31 for 65, which is a 48%. I can't complain with that performance. That's relatively perfectly sound and fine. However, High Point got away with 42% from the field, doing 31 for 74, ladies and gentlemen. So they were just shooting to be like, we got to keep pace with Wisconsin because Wisconsin's being very consistent in their shot selection. Now, 3-point selection, High Point was launching up threes as well because from the 3-point line, they were 15 for 40. So they were just launching things up. So Wisconsin was really protecting the perimeter as best they could, but they made 15. However, this is where that 3 points started to show a little bit because Wisconsin shot 9 for 23 from the 3-point line. So that's where the margin started to play a little bit of catch up when you start looking at that. But then also, ladies and gentlemen, the turnovers of this game really started to show. High Point had 6 turnovers and Wisconsin had 10 turnovers, ladies and gentlemen. So those 10 turnovers is why it boils down to the way it did. But to make matters worse, ladies and gentlemen, it's the free throws. I will preach it again. We need to make a shirt and make your free throws. And that's where it really shines the most. High Point could have won by more a little bit. But if you lose by 1 and you look at your free throw percentage for Wisconsin and you lose by 1, that's where the game could have gone into overtime. If you made your free throws, that's how you really look at the bottom line to this. But if High Point made all of their free throws, they would have still won that game if you boil it down to its simplest terms, if you add points from the free throws back into this game. Now, if you look at the free throws on top of that, Wisconsin was 11 for 12. Not bad if you can look at that. Maybe it was a free throw miss early in the game, and that's why it looked like that. But then High Point was 6 for 9. So, High Point wasn't really going to the line that much. So they were just trying to get those threes up when it mattered the most. And that's what they ended up doing to pull out this victory for the most part. And even on top of that, Wisconsin was really leading this game majority of the time. It was 48% of the time they were dealing with it and winning by a good significant margin now, ladies and gentlemen. So we don't know where this is going to take High Point. A lot of people are going to be keeping a close eye on the round of 32 and how they perform. Ideally, they want to get to the Sweet 16 to make a very good program statement for High Point, but you never know. Dreams do come to end at this dance. It's not Disney where dreams come true, ladies and gentlemen. This is March Madness, the dance that just keeps on giving, where our top of the line, best in class, start to struggle, which is our perfect segue into Duke struggling with Siena in that sense. But where did Duke go wrong? They took advantage of them. They thought they weren't going to hang around, and that's what's going to bite them in this tournament. They feel like they've been dominating teams, and this was a slip up. And now this is starting to show that if Duke doesn't take a team serious and they come across a good team like TCU, and TCU is locked in and focused, Duke could lose to a 9 seed in the round of 32. That's what we're talking about. Losing to a 9 seed. We saw that happen in North Carolina where they lost to VCU. They had a flat-out meltdown, North Carolina. But we'll get to North Carolina momentarily, ladies and gentlemen. Duke, what were you thinking? You were trailing. It was 43-32. If that happened to any other school that could actually, play ball, it's one of those things where it's just unheard of. You will lose basketball games by that margin. Now, I'm going to butcher the school's name again. Sorry about that, ladies and gentlemen. Siena. On top of that, they only played 5 players. 5 players. And I was joking with people at ETB, ladies and gentlemen. If Siena would have won this game, those 5 guys should have gotten an advertisement from 5 guys to be the face of 5 guys. That's how good it could have been for their story arc. This would have been America's true Cinderella team. But when you're only playing 5 players the entire game, they were pulled out with the last 10 seconds left in this game. So they almost played a full blown out 40-minute game. Yes, they had halftime to recuperate and rejuvenate themselves, but it's one of those moments where you just say, you needed to make substitutions. You needed to find a way to keep Duke at bay. But they were trying to keep the foot on the gas, ladies and gentlemen, and try to keep that margin. But this is where the second half started to show. Once those players started playing late in the second half, they only made 22 points in the second half. That was their downfall. And Duke, ladies and gentlemen, got 39 points. So they found a way to claw their way back into it. They went back to say, this is our strategy. This is our game plan. And we're going to play Duke basketball like we know how to play. We took Siena for granted as a team that wasn't going to hang with us. Now they're hanging with us. They didn't change their game plan. We're saying we're going to play our basketball, and we're just going to show them how we can dominate. And that's what they started to do. They found ways to work inside of the paint. They found ways to get things going. But now this could have been nervousness of the tournament, looking like saying, we got a 16 seed. This is an easy gimme. What Duke was feeling. Like, even one of the players said that. I'm like, you don't say that. That is fuel for the fire. As Nick Saban would say, that is rat poison, my friends. That's how dangerous that comment was. And if those Siena players saw that before they went out into the field, onto that court today, ladies and gentlemen, that is what they needed to find a way to get through this game. But playing your only 5 players, ladies and gentlemen, March Madness, it's a strategy that doesn't work out unless you have generational talent players, ladies and gentlemen. It's just one of those things that just doesn't work out in the long run. It just does not work out. But let's look at the stats, as we all love, as I like to do in my shows. Duke shot better from the field. They were 41% with a 21 for 59. And Siena, ladies and gentlemen, was 25 for 65 with a 38%. So relatively fairly close to that most point. But the 3 points, I mean, Duke was not shooting well from the 3-point line, ladies and gentlemen. They were 19%, got 5 for 26. So, like, Duke was just having a fiasco of a day. It was like, again, at the school dance, as we all know, like to use the analogy, they got there and they're like saying, oh, I'm going to win like prom king and prom queen type of scenario. And then they start seeing the ballots get casted in and they start to see them losing. And it's like, but I'm the favorite. I'm like, why am I losing into this manner? And then lo and behold, they'd be like, all right, we got through the first round of ballots and we're still in it. But it looks like they're at the bottom half, just trying to be like, all right, we kind of underestimated ourselves in this, but maybe we get turned around in the second half and see how things shake out. But I mean, Siena shot beautiful from the free throw line, ladies and gentlemen. 100%, 6 for 6, ladies and gentlemen, on top of that. We love a good free throw night, ladies and gentlemen. You just can't beat that. Duke, on the other hand, was 18 for 21. So they got fouled a lot. They were getting hacked left and right if you got to the line 21 times. But steals, ladies and gentlemen, on top of that, I mean, turnovers were 6 for Siena, and then Duke was 8 for the for turnovers. Rebounds looked relatively good, but Siena led majority of that game, ladies and gentlemen. And the greatest lead was by 13. So what does this mean for Duke? They got to get serious. Like, they can't do this to TCU. Let's make that clear. If they do that to TCU, a lot of brackets are going to die. That's what we're going to see. Where a lot of brackets are going to be wiped out. It's going to be like Thanos' snap. When Ohio State lost, literally half the brackets got busted. That's how bad it was. And Duke losing will probably eliminate majority, even more brackets on top of that. So we'll see what happens in shaking up in this scenario, ladies and gentlemen. But now let's dive into the meltdown of the game. I didn't add the caption real quick, but North Carolina on this scenario, the meltdown. We can't get our heads around what happened to North Carolina, ladies and gentlemen. It was one of those things like they shouldn't have any problem in this game, but lo and behold, ladies and gentlemen, it did. It happened. They had to go to overtime, and it was a game that everyone in America was watching. A lot of people that probably had North Carolina going far. in this bracket as a 6 seed, as them taking down Duke, but now makes you question, can the ACC muster up courage to get through today's games with Iowa and Clemson going at it? It's one of those moments when you realize that this could be problematic. But sticking with our dance analogy, the meltdown in this scenario of North Carolina is the girl at the school dance or the guy at the school dance, but majority of the time, they get broken up at the dance. This is what happened. Like, they came in, they felt good about themselves, they were with someone they thought they were caring about, and then they get dumped at that moment in time. Then the dramatic comes in, the makeup's running, it looks bad, a catastrophe, ladies and gentlemen. That's what happened to North Carolina. It's just disappointing to see when you lose in overtime and only getting 3 points in overtime on top of that. It was one of those moments in time where you could ask, where did it all go wrong? North Carolina at halftime was 39-28. Then that margin got really large. But VCU stuck around. They got 47 points in the second half compared to North Carolina's 36. Ties that game up. We go into overtimes. We love free basketball March Madness where you can stay a little extra late at those bars last night on Thursday. And plus, it was a thirsty Thursday. So you probably were having a lot of drinks and slamming it right back, thinking it was St. Patrick's Day. But no, ladies and gentlemen, it was March Madness what you were drinking too. And you were probably drinking the sorrows away of your bracket at this point when you saw North Carolina go into overtime, ladies and gentlemen. And then in overtime, it was 7-3 on top of that, ladies and gentlemen. So that was the magnitude of that game, ladies and gentlemen. When you look at this, well, North Carolina shooting from the field, ladies and gentlemen, was 41%. And it was 29-70 from that field. Now, VCU, on the other hand, they were 45% with 30-66 from the field, ladies and gentlemen. What a turnout that was. They were battling. They were finding ways. But the threes were at large yet again. VCU was very efficient from the three-point line. They were 42%. So they were 11 for 26. And North Carolina was 8 for 29 with a 28% from the three-point line. Free throws, ladies and gentlemen. Can I get a statement from the crowd? You make your free throws, ladies and gentlemen. The free throws. VCU got 69% from the free throw line. Nice. With that, you have 11 for 16 from their free throws attempts. North Carolina was 12 for 20. And that's why they ended up going to overtime, ladies and gentlemen. Missing 8 free throws compared to VCU's 5 free throws being missed. That's the difference in this game. And a lot of those free throws, if they got it closer, North Carolina probably could have gone to another overtime, if not won this game. And majority of the time, North Carolina was leading this game. They dominated the boards with rebounds with 44 compared to VCU's 39. Turnovers, VCU had 10. North Carolina had 8. What happened? We're still trying to figure this upset. It was a flat-out meltdown. This is probably the largest margin that we've seen in March Madness thus far with a meltdown, and for North Carolina in general. We haven't seen anything like this before. Will you let them siege back into this game? Elite basketball schools and teams find a way to put that out of reach and doesn't let that happen. North Carolina was shaky this year, but people thought they could make a good run by knocking off Duke when they played early in the middle in the season. But ladies and gentlemen, that didn't happen. And now that puts a lot of question marks in people's brackets saying, does Duke get upset based on North Carolina's performance to VCU at some point in the tournament? We don't know. We will see what VCU does in the coming sections of March Madness, ladies and gentlemen. This is getting really spicy, a little bit juicy. But now we got some women's games we can cover in today and the men's. We're going to start talking with the men's a little bit because this is the second day of the round of 64. We're going to dive in a little bit of the women's action as they start to enter their first round of 64 today. So we got basketball around the clock. So if you have the day off find that local sports bar or turn on so many screens. You just have like 6 screens like laid up and be like, I got a game here, I got a game there. Because there's really no red zone for March Madness where you have like a quad screen and watching all the games. It's normally one game at a time. They really need to start creating that. That is a moneymaker. I'm going to give it to them the day that they create it, and it's like a March Madness pass. I can see NBC doing something like that. And they're going to throw it on Peacock. And lo and behold, we have that, ladies and gentlemen. But let's start looking at some of the men's games, ladies and gentlemen. So the men's games we got today, we got the 12 seed Akron versus Texas Tech, who's a 5 seed in this scenario, ladies and gentlemen. On top of that, then we got Utah State as a 9 seed versus Villanova, which is always a basketball school, as an 8 seed. Miami of Ohio as an 11 seed taking on Tennessee. Then you kind of round things out with a good 8 and 9 matchup between a 9 seed of Iowa and an 8 seed of Clemson, ladies and gentlemen. So without further ado, let's get the talking points underway, ladies and gentlemen. So first up in this scenario, ladies and gentlemen, we got Akron, number 12, coming off of a great MAC championship campaign. Miami of Ohio had a struggle. Akron got through as a 12 seed, looking great. And Texas Tech, losing their star player at this point, could be in some trouble, even though they're quite favored with a almost 82% chance to win. But, ladies and gentlemen, this game's at 12:40 p.m. Eastern Time, 9:40 p.m. Pacific Time on True TV. So make sure you tune on the True TV to catch this one, ladies and gentlemen. But looks like the spread, Texas Tech is a 7.5 point favorite on minus 7.5 points for this game. On top of that, but ladies and gentlemen, I think Akron has the capability of doing something special. They got the good guard play, finding ways to create shots, good ball movement, and that's what you kind of need. You need to find a way to get inside the paint, drive a little bit, create some contact fouls, and find ways to get this job done, ladies and gentlemen. It's one of those things that's not easy to pull off, but it makes it quite difficult to find a way to do it. Now, if you look at some of the stats, I mean, Akron has been shooting relatively well on average points per game. They're averaging about 88 compared to Texas Tech's 80. You look at points against, I mean, they're fairly even on the paper. Akron gives up 73.5 compared to Texas Tech's 72.6. So we're just going to round down 72.5 as well. But at the same time, the competition is not the same that they're playing up against. Texas Tech is in the Big 12 dealing with Iowa State and the likes of Arizona. So that's why theirs is slightly higher. But Akron hasn't really been going up against that similar caliber of competition. So you could say the points a game might be increased in this matchup against a bigger school. Now, will Akron come out aggressive? Yes. They're not gonna come out flat. I could see Texas Tech struggling a little bit, letting Akron hang around, building that confidence for Akron and creating problematic stuff. But from the field, Akron shoots relatively well. They shoot about 50% from the field compared to Texas Tech's 47. So if Akron's shooting 50% today, this might be a true upset that we have on the horizon. And I like a good upset because when you pick up the upset and nobody else does, it really helps you out for your bracket. And it'll watch other people tumble and you get away with it. And we like that when that happens. But the perfect brackets are running out of time, ladies and gentlemen. But the unperfect brackets are still looming large as well. So we want to see that first perfect unbracket where you get the first round all incorrect. And that would be glorious to witness. But I don't think we'll ever see that. But who knows? But, ladies and gentlemen, the rebounds, Akron's relatively good about, or 38 compared to Texas Tech's almost 37. Assists, again, that ball movement, like I said, is good for Akron. They get about 18 assists per game compared to Texas Tech's about 16. Then you have the block party, ladies and gentlemen, which kind of is about almost 3 blocks a game on average for both schools. Steals, Akron is a very steely team, ladies and gentlemen, with 7.5 compared to Texas Tech's about 6 steals on game on average. And then if you look at the last 5 games, I mean, Texas Tech was dealing with teams in the tournament. They beat Iowa State, but then also lose to Iowa State. So it's very tough to what kind of Texas Tech team you're going to get. Because when they last played Iowa State, it was 75-53 and a terrible loss. But before they end up playing Iowa State, like back in February, it was 82-73. So Iowa State in that scenario was averaging consistently about 74 points on average between that. But then they lose to TCU 73-65, and they lose to BYU 82-76. So after their star player kind of went down, that's kind of when you see the losing streak ended up happening. But then you look at Akron, the last 5 games, they are just not beating teams, but they're winning in close ones. They played Toledo 79-76, beat Kent 75-68, beat Buffalo 73-70. Then they played Northern Illinois 94-55, and then Central Michigan 77-64, ladies and gentlemen. So it's a good matchup, if you ask me, a good matchup across the board into this scenario as well, ladies and gentlemen. So that's what I'm thinking. I think an upset's going to happen here. We're going to get an early upset, a lot more brackets getting busted, but I could be wrong, and Texas Tech finds a way to win. But when your star player is out in the tournament, it makes it very, very difficult to capitalize and try to have a great run or a campaign push. So you can catch Akron, the 12 seed, versus Texas Tech at 12:40 p.m. Eastern Time, 9:40 a.m. Pacific Time on True TV, ladies and gentlemen. Now let's dive in to the glorious another 8 and 9 matchup between Utah State as a 9 seed versus Villanova as an 8 seed. 4 p.m. Eastern today, ladies and gentlemen. 4:10 p.m. Eastern today, 1:10 p.m. Pacific Time on TNT, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, what's going to happen here? This is another coin flip of a game. I personally think that Villanova can get the job done, but also Utah State. This is what boils down to. Shooting good from the field, making your free throws, and just capitalizing on the opportunities that you have thus far, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, right now, Utah State is a little bit of a favorite with about a 52% chance to win, compared to Villanova's about 48% chance to win this game. Now, you may ask, what will happen in this scenario? I mean, looking at Villanova, ladies and gentlemen, they're not really shooting that great for the most part, but they're averaging about 77 points per game compared to Utah State's 82, almost 83 points per game. Points against about the same, giving up about 70 points a game. From the field, Utah State shoots relatively better with 50% from the field, and Villanova 46%, ladies and gentlemen. And then rebounds about the same, 34 and a half, relatively same. Assists slightly better for Utah State, 17 and a half compared to Villanova's 15 and a half. And then the blocks are relatively same with about 2 blocks a game. Steals goes out to Utah State with almost 9 steals a game compared to Villanova's about 7 steals a game. But Villanova loses to Georgetown, beats up on Xavier. But the only team that they played against that was in the tournament was St. John's, and it wasn't a clean loss. It was 89-57, ladies and gentlemen. It's one of those things like, do I pick Villanova, and are they doomed for an upset after losing to St. John's. But when St. John's has a good basketball team, it normally is a good basketball team. Like, they're not seeded bad for any reason. Like, they are a 5th seed for a reason in most tournaments when they're at that spot. And they are a team that kind of goes to the Sweet 16, maybe to an Elite 8, depending. But they are a Sweet 16 team when they have a good team. That's like same with Gonzaga. Like, when they have a good team, they are a team that composes a threat, can get to the Sweet 16 and the Elite 8, depending on how things shake out. But Utah State, ladies and gentlemen, just hasn't been having that best time of games, ladies and gentlemen. Just hasn't. Well, I mean, they took on San Diego State, winning 73-62. Took on Nevada, 79-66. Took on UNLV, 80-60. Took on the University of New Mexico, 94-90. And then they lost to UNLV in a blowout fashion, 92-65. So it's very difficult on what you're going to get, but Utah State has that momentum going into this, I would say, matchup, feeling confident, got the wins underneath their belt. Villanova is trying to get back on this win streak when you need to win about 7 games to claim the title. So it's not an easy task, easy feat. And then losing to Georgetown does not help for that case. So we're going to keep a close eye on this one, ladies and gentlemen. So when the game's on, make sure you see how the score is looking. At this point in the afternoon, you're probably thinking about getting lunch, maybe possibly an early dinner so you can get yourself a good seat at your local sports bar. But some of you might be there all day. So you might be on your second lunch at this point, or you need an afternoon appetizer with some good mozzarella sticks, some nachos, or some glorious onion rings. It depends on your taste buds and how you're feeling at that point. Maybe you need to pick me up after your brackets decide to crash some more and bust out some more. But I noticed that I probably should make a comment for Nick. Maybe in the future, I did think about this for maybe a March Madness edition. Maybe we can have the bracket busters and we could create an AI image like Ghostbusters for it about March Madness brackets being busted. Maybe it's a good pregame show. I don't know. But it would be trying to pick out the possible bracket upsets after we made all of our brackets to see, like, yeah, we could see that's a possible upset, but I end up going this way. And then it does come true. So maybe a thing for next year's March Madness. We'll throw it into the ideation room and we'll see what ends up creating out for that, ladies and gentlemen. But we go on to another possible good upset. Miami of Ohio, an 11 seed, ladies and gentlemen, an 11 seed. Losing your MAC tournament, but only having one loss on the year. Playing Tennessee as a 6 seed. SEC trying to show up, saying Miami of Ohio just had a lucky season. They don't belong at this dance. This game is at 4:25 p.m. Eastern time today, 1:25 p.m. Pacific time on TBS. This is, ladies and gentlemen, like the America's sweetheart right now. Having a great year, 32-1. Really unheard of in the men's game this day and age from like how you see teams shake out. But this is the I would say the person at the dance, like not a Cinderella, but the glass slipper wearing girl or the best dress, and they fell down in the mud, but they still showed up at the dance somehow. And now they're about to break the best dance moves and maybe give the people running up for prom king and queen for one of those scenarios a run for their money. Like, this is one of those things. And they got to start by taking down a basketball school like Tennessee and derailing a lot of the capabilities of what ends up going down for Miami of Ohio, ladies and gentlemen. So this matchup looks like it's minus 12.5 for Tennessee. But I feel like Tennessee is going to come out flat. I think they're going to overlook Miami of Ohio. And it's going to create some problems. Miami of Ohio, on average, kind of shoots 90 points per game almost on average. But again, competition is not the same compared to what Tennessee goes up to against in the SEC. And Tennessee has almost 80 points per game. So it's almost a 10-point difference. But again, competition, keep that in mind, ladies and gentlemen. Points against, Miami of Ohio gives up about 75 compared to Tennessee's 69. But from the field, ladies and gentlemen, basketball courts are all created the same outside of the rims. They shoot about 52% for Miami of Ohio. Tennessee, on the other hand, ladies and gentlemen, about 46. Rebounds, Tennessee really protects the boards with about 42 compared to Miami's Ohio's 35. Assists, great ball movement by both squads, averaging about 16 for both. Blocks, relatively the same, averaging about 3 blocks a game. And steals, about 7 for both schools. So if you look at the defense and like ball movement, teams are relatively similar. But again, remind yourself, competition is what's driving this argument. And when you look at the distance, Miami of Ohio played a significant game against SMU, winning by 10 to get into this 11 seed spot. 89 to 79, ladies and gentlemen. It's one of those things like, does Miami keep rolling? Do they keep dancing? Will they be dancing on their own? Will they find a way when the DJ transition to the next song? Will they be getting off the dance floor, or will they be sticking on and showing the world that they've been jumping and driving all night long and creating the most Cinderella run that we've seen to a Sweet 16 berth? Or will they fall short and lose to Tennessee? It's not easy doing a play-in and rolling straight into this game against a Tennessee team that's been up in the air all year. From losing to Alabama, but beating South Carolina, losing to Vanderbilt twice, beating Auburn. Like, we really don't know what we're going to get from this Tennessee team, ladies and gentlemen. It's one of those things you just got to keep watching as things pull up and things develop overall, ladies and gentlemen. So what's going to happen here, ladies and gentlemen, is Miami of Ohio is going to start playing aggressive. They're going to get scrappy. They got to watch their fouls, but make good committed fouls in this game, and that's when it's going to shine. Make your free throws, create the turnover opportunities on fast break and get fast break points, and put Tennessee on the back foot where they had to find a ways to claw back. But now that's where their mind space is at. They got to find ways to get through, make magic happen, and keep on dancing, ladies and gentlemen. But we'll see what happens when the beat drops today at 4:25 p.m. Eastern Time, 1:25 p.m. Pacific Time on TBS. I like how Miami of Ohio has been playing all year. They had some close games in the MAC tournament and just derailing themselves later on. But they got heart. They got the heart. They got the desire to do something special for the university. And it's one of those things where it's like, I could have drove down to Miami of Ohio to see them actually play this season. But with work schedules and all that stuff, I didn't have the opportunity to do that. And probably one of those things you regret in life where it's like you see a team doing well and they just don't come out and you just don't show up for those moments. It's one of those things, but you try your best to see historical moments when you can and say that you were a part of those historical moments, because that kind of stands the test of time, saying, where were you when you were at the last Yankees Stadium, at the old Yankee Stadium? Where were you at that night when they played their final home game there and before they tore down that stadium? But, ladies and gentlemen, that's also for other things. It's like the day that they don't play in Pasadena for the Rose Bowl is going to be a very sad day. Like, where were you at the last Rose Bowl game at Pasadena? I don't think they're ever going to change it. Now, granted, I could see them renovating and building a new one, but that's like the holy grail of college football. I don't think you're really going to touch that stadium. Now, you could add a roof and all that stuff, but also UCLA plays there. But UCLA could create their own stadium, and the Rose Bowl kind of gets left alone and really doesn't get too much spotlight outside of maybe big moments every once in a while. But it hasn't got to that point yet, ladies and gentlemen. But this is where we're going to go in that scenario. Now we're going into another 8-9 matchup, ladies and gentlemen. A topic of conversation that will kind of build up a little anticipation for the Big Ten right now. I mean, Iowa, defense school right now, defensive football, slugging it out in basketball as well. ACC has been some troublesome, and Clemson could be running in that same course right now against an Iowa team that can I would say handle its own when it needs to, but it's going to be a close one. This game's at 6:50 p.m. Eastern time tonight, 3:50 p.m. Pacific time on TNT, ladies and gentlemen. Let's get down to business. And ladies and gentlemen, it's at the hour. Well, let's say not at the hour, but as we start winding down today's program, like I said, we've been covering a lot of great topics thus far. Pre-game shows looking relatively good for the most part. But again, the percentage margin is another coin flip. Clemson, ladies and gentlemen, has about a 52% chance. I would say about a 50% chance to win compared to Iowa's 49% chance to win, about give or take, depending how we want to swing it. But, ladies and gentlemen, the bracket. This is another bracket buster. Points per game on average, ladies and gentlemen. Iowa 75, Clemson 74. Points given up is 66 for both squads. From the field, Iowa edges out a little bit better with 49% from the field compared to Clemson's 45. Rebounds, Clemson slightly better with 34 compared to Iowa's 29. Assists, Iowa has a little bit better ball movement with 15 compared to Clemson's about 13. Blocks are about the same, between almost 2 to 3 blocks on game on average. Steals go to Iowa with about 7 compared to Clemson's 6, ladies and gentlemen. But, ladies and gentlemen, Clemson lost to Duke and beat North Carolina by 1. So that's the head scratcher, because North Carolina just choked their game away to VCU. And does Clemson do the same thing? Because they played North Carolina earlier in March and lost 67-63. So we really don't know what this Clemson team is going to do. I think they're going to blunder and they're going to lose, because all their games that they've been playing against outside of Wake Forest have been close, and that's outside of Duke. But Iowa has been struggling the last few games, but they've been playing teams relatively close. Like, they played Ohio State close, lost to them by 72-69, beat Maryland 75-64, lost to Nebraska in overtime, which is another March Madness team. In overtime, keep that in mind, 84-75. They lost to Michigan by, I want to say, 3, 71-68. And they lost to Penn State by 2, 71-69. Nice. So this Iowa team is going to keep it close. The question is, are they going to be able to close out? Or are they going to mess up on the free throw lines and lose because of that manner, ladies and gentlemen? So that's where that game is kind of lined up for the most part. Very interesting game in the most part. So we're going to keep a close eye on how that is going to shake out for sure, ladies and gentlemen. Now let's start looking at some of the women's games that are coming to appear itself. So for the women's games, you may ask yourself, Trevor, why is Hardwood Gameday on a Friday instead of a Saturday? Well, ladies and gentlemen, I want to be a bearer of good news. I was able to get some women's March Madness tickets in Columbus, so I will be seeing Ohio State versus Howard at 11:30 Eastern time tomorrow. And I will also be getting the Notre Dame game at 2 o'clock in the afternoon against Fairfield. So I got myself some March Madness action, and this will mark my 5th time being at March Madness consecutively. On top of that, last year I went to the women's game. The year before that, I went up to Pittsburgh and got a double overtime experience. And then the year after that, I would say the previous year after that one was the time I was in Columbus and watching the 16C upset Purdue. And then I saw Ohio State lose to Villanova in Pittsburgh. So that's my March Madness journey. And that's where we're at right now. I appreciate when Ohio State women's get March Madness. Though, granted, sometimes you may get on the weekday or you get a weekend where you can go out and watch. I like being able to go and do it. Last year, I did think about trying to do the impossible where the men's were up in Cleveland and do the game from because they had a morning slot and the games would finish up in the afternoon. And then I was going to drive back to Columbus to get the Tennessee-Ohio State game in the round of 32 for the women and make it a full-blown basketball ordeal. It would have truly felt like I was on College Game Day where you have those big morning slate and then you travel back in the evening to just see that moment in that time and doing those big moments like that. That is what I probably would like to do at some point in my podcasting career where I could do a game, fly to another game, or drive to the next town over to go to a big matchup. Maybe I could do that in the Big Ten where I can see that 100%, where it's like I go from Champaign, Illinois to Bloomington, Indiana, and just be able to get 2 games like that where you have a noon game and then you got to drive to Indiana to catch a night game in Bloomington. And then we go up to Indianapolis to get a hotel stay for Sunday. And then we drive back to Columbus Sunday morning or Sunday afternoon, depending. But that's a different lifetime, a different lifestyle than what I'm currently living. So that's where I'm at, and that's why today's broadcast is where it's at right now, ladies and gentlemen, instead of a Saturday on Friday. And we are doing relatively well on views. We're at 130 views right now, ladies and gentlemen. So we really appreciate for all of those that are tuning in for today's special edition of Hardwood Game Day on a Friday, ladies and gentlemen. So we really appreciate that. Great turnout at 10 a.m. Eastern time for our tip-off, we can say, instead of kickoff for our gridlock renditions. But Hardwood Game Day has really been showing its leaps and bounds after the football season and after college football concluded. So we thank you for all that you've done for the leaps and bounds of this show. It's really been a successful turnout of what we have got going on Hardwood Game Day. So we really appreciate what's going on. But for the games that we have today, we got some 8 and 9 matchups that we've been really keeping a close eye on, with Virginia as a 9 seed and Oregon as an 8 seed. That's happening today. Then you have 2 Saturday matchups that we're looking as another 8 and 9 matchup to keep a close eye, as Syracuse as a 9 seed takes on Iowa State as an 8 seed on Saturday, March 21st. And then you have USC as a 9 seed versus Clemson as an 8 seed Saturday as well, ladies and gentlemen, March 21st. Before we get the game on the way, let's get a great drink of water before we go this quick rundown. All righty, ladies and gentlemen, let's get the talk show started on the most part. So, Virginia Tech. Oh, wow. I forgot the Tech and Virginia Tech. Let me fix the banner, ladies and gentlemen. Virginia Tech, the Hokies. Can they do the hokey pokey in the women's dance? And that's what it's all about. With the Oregon Ducks, I'm obviously it's not the chicken dance, but they're gonna do the duck dance. Let's go with that. Is it enough to keep that momentum going? Will they flap their feathers for the Battle of the Birds, or will the Ducks quack their last quack in this March Madness dance? Or will the Lady Hokies do their hokey pokey dance and say that's what it's all about after they get a significant win in this matchup? But ladies and gentlemen, Oregon is a 65% chance to win compared to Virginia Tech's 34% chance to win, ladies and gentlemen. So very difficult matchup that we're going to end up witnessing here today, ladies and gentlemen. Everything's looking relatively good across the board. The game is also at 1:30 p.m. Eastern today, ladies and gentlemen. 10:30 a.m. Pacific time on ESPN. ESPN2, ladies and gentlemen. But if you look at the stat lines, Oregon's about almost 75 points per game on average compared to Virginia Tech's 73. Points against about the same, 61 for Virginia Tech to 65. Oh, we'll just say 64.5. Field goal percentage, ladies and gentlemen, is about 45 compared to Virginia Tech's 41. Rebounds, ladies and gentlemen, is about 40 and a half compared to Oregon's 35, almost 36 rebounds. Good ball movement for Oregon with 17 compared to Virginia Tech's 15 and a half. Blocks, ladies and gentlemen, is 4.8 compared to Oregon's 3.7. And then Oregon likes to steal the ball a lot, which it's going to be a 10 steals on average each game compared to Virginia Tech 7.8. But, ladies and gentlemen, will we see a golden egg happen for Oregon? And that golden egg is a defeat. Or will that golden egg will be a victorious win for them? I mean, their bad loss was to Michigan, which was 80-58. Not too good when you're trying to go into momentum for the tournament. But Virginia Tech got embarrassed to North Carolina twice, losing to overtime back in February, 66-63. But then on March 6th, they lose 68. So we really don't know what we're going to get between these two teams. I mean, Oregon has been very consistent when they played against Purdue, winning by healthy margins both times. But Virginia Tech likes to keep their games close. But like I said, I'll keep preaching it. We'll probably get a coffee mug or a T-shirt the day we start doing merch for ETB. But, ladies and gentlemen, make your free throws, capitalize on the turnovers, find ways to execute, manage your fouls, don't get in foul trouble, and you can win a lot of these ball games. But when you protect the perimeter and shoot a lot of threes and your three-point percentage is down, and you don't make a lot of threes, that also is going to be a key impact to this game as well, ladies and gentlemen. And let's go to the next one for the most part, ladies and gentlemen. That kind of concludes Virginia Tech as a 9 seed versus Oregon as an 8 seed, 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 10:30 a.m. Pacific Time on ESPN2, and that's for today's game. Now let's start looking at Saturday's slot, ladies and gentlemen. For the most part, we got Syracuse as a 9 seed versus Iowa State, ladies and gentlemen, as an 8 seed. Iowa State normally does have a good, I would say the most recent years, they do have a good squad. The chances of them winning is quite favorable. On top of that, so it'll be 63 compared to Syracuse's 62 for the most part. What did I say? 62, 63. No, 36, ladies and gentlemen. My goodness, I can't read today. Oh man. But if you start looking at the points, ladies and gentlemen, like the points, it's one of those things where you just imagine like what's going to happen in this game. Like that's what we're talking about here. Like Iowa State averages about 82 points per game compared to Syracuse's 74. Now, points against 63 compared to 67. From the field, Iowa State shoots better with 48% compared to Syracuse's 42%. And then rebounds, 42 rebounds for Syracuse, 38 for Iowa State. Assist is 4 points. Assist is 14.6 compared to Iowa State's 20. Again, that is great ball movement where you're almost averaging about 20 assists a game, ladies and gentlemen. Great ball movement, if you ask me. Blocks, Syracuse does more blocks with about 5.4 compared to Iowa's 2.4. Steals, again, Syracuse likes to steal with about 10.5 compared to Iowa State's 6.4. But if you look at the last 5 games, Iowa State kind of struggled a little bit with Arizona State 77 to 68, but they took care of Kansas State with 93 to 79, lose to Oklahoma State. versus 88-77 TCU, losing to that one 80-73, and then beating Arizona State 90-64. So it really just depends on how they're shooting today. Is how Iowa State closes things out. And then you have Syracuse really kind of dominating, but they lost to Louisville 87-61, beat Cal 70-59, beat Boston College 90-65, loses to Notre Dame by 10-72-62, and then losing to North Carolina State, ladies and gentlemen, with 82-69 to round out their last 5 games. So definitely going to be an interesting one, but you can catch today's game at 5:30 p.m. Eastern today, Saturday, I should say, 5:30 p.m. Eastern today, and 2:30 p.m. Pacific time on ESPN2. And then to round out today's selection for our pregame show, ladies and gentlemen, that we thank you so much for all you tuning in. We have USC, ladies and gentlemen, a 9 seed. The Lady Spartans going up against the Lady Tigers of Clemson as an 8 seed. 3:30 p.m. Eastern today on Saturday, 12:30 p.m. Pacific time on ESPN2. Ladies and gentlemen, USC's women look very dominant in the projection to win, with a 76% chance to win compared to Clemson's 23.8% chance to win as well. But, ladies and gentlemen, it's one of those moments when you realize that this can be very interesting on how things end up shaking out, where Clemson averages about 67 points per game compared to USC's almost 70, points against 62 compared to 58. From the field, slightly similar, Clemson with a 43 compared to USC's 41. Rebounds, about the same, but edges out to USC with 37 compared to Clemson's 36. Assists go to USC with 16.5 compared to Clemson's 13. Blocks, about 5.8 compared to Clemson's 2.7. And then you look at the steals, ladies and gentlemen, on top of that, 8.4 compared to Clemson's 6.4 on top of that, ladies and gentlemen. So, I mean, last 5 games, they're playing Duke tough, but Clemson doesn't really score a lot of points. But USC's been on a terrible losing spell. They lost to Washington 76-64. Lost to UCLA 73-50. Losing to Penn State by 3, 85-82. Losing to Ohio State 88-83. But beating Wisconsin 66-59. But Clemson loses to Duke 66-46. Beating Virginia 63-50. Losing to Stanford 85-50. Beating Cal 70-63. And winning against Duke 53-55, ladies and gentlemen. What a interesting matchup we got going on Saturday as well at the 3:30 slot Eastern time and 12:30 p.m. Pacific time on ESPN2. Well, ladies and gentlemen, there we have it. The March Madness continues. The dancing is getting better as the days progress on. We don't know where this dance is going to go. Will the DJ keep putting on certain teams' favorite tracks? Will they keep staying on that dance floor? Or will they be escorted out as the dance numbers gets thinner and thinner by the day until we crown our kings and queens of the court? Make sure you tune in. Watch your brackets. Find your favorite snack and appetizer at your local sports bar today if you're off. If not, hopefully you can get to the local sports bar for dinner to watch the evening games. So maybe your bracket still has a chance, or your work bracket is doing well enough so you continue to brag at work and saying that you know ball and your work colleagues don't know ball. Really depends what's going on today, ladies and gentlemen. But without further ado, we want to thank the 133 people that tuned into this live stream today. Without you, this wouldn't be possible from what we got going on. The more you watch the stream and other streams of our platform on ETB, ladies and gentlemen. It gets us closer to get monetization so we can improve our equipment to create better thumbnails and create more opportunities for everyone on this network to do other fun things. Maybe we get to the point where we could do an ETB charity mini golf outing and we can do a live stream for that. We can get production and all that stuff, fly people to one city, and we could do it out in San Diego to work with Callan's schedule and bring everyone out there to do a little US Open, or we'll like to call it the ETB Open, ladies and gentlemen. Without further ado, let's conclude today's program. Thank you so much for all watching, and we'll catch you on next week's edition of Hardwood Game Day. So long for now. Bye-bye.